Hi, this is Mrs. Pedersen. We're going to be working on these objectives of radicals. The first topic is going to be evaluating and simplifying square roots. Here's the definition of a square root. You have a radical sign, your radicand, which is underneath. We call that the radical expression. So our first example, A, is the square root of 64. These are some simpler problems that you've done in Algebra 2. So when we take the square root of 64, we're looking for a perfect square. So a perfect square for 64 would be 8 times 8. So that answer would be probably what you looked like in Algebra 2 would be the square root of 8 squared, which equals 8. Example B, negative square root of 49. Your negative will be out in front. And then you take the square root of 49, which is 7. The next example is the square root of 1/4. So you want to separate out that radical into two separate radicals. You're going to have the square root of 1 over the square root of 4. And then you would simplify those separately. So the square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. All right. On to the next slide. Notice that these are different examples. One has the radical singular and the other one is separate. So when we do orders of operations with example D, you want to combine 9 and 16 together. So simplify first by addition. So 9 plus 16 is 25. And then the radical. And now what is the square root of 25? The square root of 25 is 5. All right, example D, the square root of 9 plus the square root of 16. You want to do those separately. So the square root of 9 is 3. And then the square root of 16 is 4. And then you just add those two numbers together. So 3 plus 4 is 7. All right. Moving on to simplifying when you have a term that's squared. If it's a principal square root, we want to take the absolute value of that a. So for example, the square root of 6 squared, you're going to take the absolute value of that 6. If you have a negative 6 squared, when you take the absolute value, you also get 6. So a couple examples here. The square root of negative 36 is not possible. It's actually considered an imaginary number. And the reason why is you can't take 6 times a negative 6 and get a positive 36. You're going to get, this breaks down to a positive 6 times a negative 6. And that's not a perfect square. So at this point, we cannot simplify it, so we'll just leave that. Later on, we'll talk about those imaginary numbers. Example number 2. This one is a perfect square, so you can go ahead and take the absolute value of that negative 13. So you're going to take the absolute value of negative 13 to give you a positive 13. So that's our first video on simplifying square roots.